Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Morning Shot. My name is Ramon, and Byron is joining us from Kubuki Land, Wakanda. I can't remember. It's some weird rural town on the coast of South Africa. Hello, Byron. How has it been without showering for, what is it, 3 weeks now?
Well, with water shedding,
Yeah.
nah, mate, we still got water. We still got water. Just we're not that rural.
Oh,
Crying out
okay.
loud.
Not that rural. All right. I thought there was water shedding in your area.
We,
But nevertheless, I'm glad you're able to shower. I'm sure your employees and your partner and everyone around you appreciates that fact.
I'm sure. I'm sure.
Byron doesn't do small jokes. Anyway, talking about shedding, we're going to talk about load shedding at Eskom because Eskom released a press statement on the 29th of June, so it's a bit out of date, but it exemplifies South Africa very, very well. So I'll bring it up for everyone and I'll just read the most pertinent points. In that, due to the unlawful and unprotected labour action, which has caused widespread disruption to Eskom's power plants, they are unable to restore some generators to service. And in essence, what they are saying is this 3 week strike that has happened at Eskom is basically causing weeks of backlogs in terms of repairs and maintenance and things like that. So, based on that, and I think that being very sort of courteous, we can assume that load shedding will happen for weeks to come due to a, let's be honest, not a huge strike, a 2 to 3 week strike at most. And I think this story about Eskom exemplifies the country. We are so burdened to the hilt with debt and crime and a variety of other things. Any shock to the system destroys absolutely everything. And Eskom is the most pure example of that.
Yeah, there's very little that you can add to that as a summary. I know that people of recent people have said, "Oh, we're just a talking shop to moan about the government of the day." And they're wondering where the analysis is, but I'm not really sure what analysis you can kind of add to the situation. So to give people some context, right? Eskom, as you know, is on load shedding. Now, the primary reason they say for the potential load shedding is because of a wage dispute that's occurred between the unions at Eskom and the management at Eskom. They're saying that the labor dispute is over what was considered by the main union a 13% pay increase, which Eskom said is bullshit. They said they can't afford it. Um, Eskom said they would initially provide a 5% pay increase, which is way above anything that anybody in the private sector is getting. And the union initially said no. Having done that, Solidarity asked for a pay increase of 5.9% with no strikes, or at least no disruptive strikes. And the main union at Eskom again said no, they're unwilling to negotiate. So what's essentially happened is they've then gone on strike. Eskom's gone to court and said, can we get an interdict to stop them from striking because they're essentially essential services, and they were granted that by the courts. So the strike that's been at Eskom has essentially been what you could term as illegal. Now, it being an illegal strike, we've seen what those kind of strikes look like in the past. We've seen them in Marikana and other places. They do tend to get violent. They can also result in, should we say, infrastructure damage. So the infrastructure damage that we've seen unofficially, that what we've heard of, is we've seen one of the conveyor belts which bring coal into Eskom break. Now, that hasn't been very well publicized, but this has happened before and it resulted in significant load shedding in 2021 and 2020. So it's not it's a design issue that they're aware of, and it means the coal can't get to the actual power stations, so the power stations go off. So because of that infrastructure damage, Eskom is now operating at less than capacity, and they're saying that between 80 to 90% of the workforce haven't actually pitched for work. Now, there isn't that they haven't all pitched for work because they're unable to go, that they're unwilling to go to work. In many instances, they're unable to go to work because obviously the strikers are stopping them from going. At the same time, we're seeing the usual infrastructure damage that we're seeing everywhere else. So the story becomes curious because what effectively Eskom's having to now do is something we've seen for a number of years, and that is they're burning diesel at an astronomical rate in order to keep the lights on. Now, obviously, with diesel shortages around the world because of the conflict that's going on in Ukraine, and obviously the escalating cost of now the barrels. I don't think Ramon and I weren't intending to talk about this, but Norway has also got a problem, and they've ceased to be refining certain forms of oil, which means obviously again there's going to be a restriction in terms of the availability of crude oil and, as a result, diesel and petrol around the world. So Eskom's obviously feeling the crunch. At the same time, a more cynical person, here's where the analysis comes in, a more cynical person might say that the ANC is obviously debt burdened. And what we have recently seen in recent days is the ANC said that they're basically going to get rid of their, the subsidy, which basically should be the tax relief on petrol at the pump. So now we're getting that, and we're seeing an increase in the cost of petrol. So a more cynical person might say, well, that means because the vast majority of people who need to run businesses and households have to have a generator. And as a result, more cynical person may say, you know, everybody's going to have to go out and buy fuel in order to run those generators, which in turn creates a surplus of potential revenue for the treasury. But I suppose the big thing, Ramon, and this is nearly over to you, is that Eskom have now said, after weeks of negotiations, and the negotiations have become problematic in themselves because, the news is Dorata gave suggestions of a pay increase and then told his staff not to negotiate them. He was like, that's what you're getting, and that's the end of it. And the unions described that as being rather rude and arrogant, the usual white arrogance bullshit that we hear everywhere. And, the net result is the big thing that the unions seem to be gunning for now isn't actually a pay increase, it's actually the removal of the rate. But news is that's just come out is that Eskom have agreed a 7% wage increase with the workers in order for them to go back to work. Interestingly enough, in the very same day, News 24, Propaganda 24, has released an article with the Treasury saying they need to come up with a credible alternative on ways to pay the 400 billion debt that Eskom's in. So on one hand, they admit Eskom's in serious debt trouble. On the other hand, they're like, oh, we've just agreed a 7% pay increase in order to get people back to work. So it does kind of have a feel of should we say, a mafia infrastructure, like the mafia's holding the country to ransom. What's your view, Ramon?
So I quite like the theory that if you look at a microcosm, it explains the macrocosm as well. So Eskom is a microcosm that is interesting to me because the unions are always ANC affiliated. We know that. Eskom
Yeah.
is owned and controlled by the ANC, and Eskom and the ANC also controls the price of diesel and all of that. But most importantly, Eskom is controlled by a cabal of BE entrepreneurs and carry deployed, members of the ANC and all that. You can have 20 years of theft and robbery and corruption and pillaging all you want. But when it catches up to you, the people that created the crisis cannot be trusted to deal with it in a material way, which is why Eskom is such a neat encapsulation of what South Africa is currently going through. You can try to control the decline as much as you want, but you weaken the very system for that decline. And external shocks like the Russia Ukraine thing or the price of oil or whatever, any external shock to the system tends to break the system even more. So, in essence, Eskom is a very good analogy for the Republic of South Africa as we know it. And whatever happens there is happening more broadly to the country under ANC rule. And it's all problems caused by the ANC. There's no other reason for it. Excuse me.
Yeah, I mean, essentially it's ideology and practice because the central ideology, and I know people come across and they moan at us for, should we say, our anti-communist views, but you've got to kind of understand why we say this, and the view is this: the ANC's view is that of the National Democratic Revolution, which means they want to have central control. That means the top six have central control over everything, and they get to dictate the policy. In doing that, they tend to control everything. But you have to kind of look at the essential nature of humanity. Is humanity like good with good intentions? Will it produce good outcomes, or is it fundamentally flawed and greedy? And if you look at it from a socialist communist point of view, it's kind of like, well, we're fundamentally good, and therefore all the things that we do and the decisions we make will be for the best of everybody. And that's not what we see in practice. What we tend to see in practice is humanity is fundamentally flawed and people are corrupt. And that's exactly what happens when you concentrate power. The power isn't used for the good of people, as the communist idea basically is. The power is essentially used for personal greed. So what you essentially see has happened in Eskom is that the power has been centralized in the top six, in the NEC, if you will, and all they've done is they've kind of used that power in order to self-enrich. In the process of self-enriching, they have unfortunately left the actual infrastructure to decay and fall apart. We all know this, and we all know it to be true. Whilst the idea of centralization continues, there is no way to fix this, because it betrays the fundamental idea. It gives you the idea. Doesn't matter if it's Cyril, doesn't matter if it's Mbeki, doesn't matter if it's freaking John Steenhuisen. It doesn't matter. Centralized power will corrupt. The people that wield it will use it for personal gain. And that cascades downwards. It's nothing more than a king cascading it to his dukes. His dukes are going to be just as corrupt, and they're going to look to have personal enrichment just as much. And unless you bring in, as we say, the private sector and break up the monopoly, this is not going to get better. I suppose the big risk at this point in time, though, is at what point can you say that you can still bring in the private sector and have a system that can be repaired? We are getting to a point where even if you brought in the complete private sector tomorrow, you couldn't plug them up to the grid because there is no grid. There's nothing to plug them into. And that's the risk I think we face.
No, it certainly is. And, there's a great article on Politics Web, which I'm making a morning shot original on, where they use the analogy of the tortoise and the scorpion, right? Where the scorpion, the tortoise takes the scorpion across a river. Halfway through, the scorpion stings the tortoise and kills them both. But before that, the tortoise says, "But why are you doing this? I thought we were friends." "No, no, I'm your friend, but I'm a scorpion, and stinging is what I do. Like, I can't control it." Rapacious looting is what the ANC does. The only question we have, to use the analogy, is our shell hard enough to withstand them for much longer? Because once that shell is
Mm.
broken, once the social system of South Africa is done for, uh, there will be nothing left to save. I mean, what government will want to come in after the ANC to save? To save what? There's nothing there. We're going to be like complete, like Somalia 101. So there won't be anything to save, politically or otherwise. But that time is
Yeah.
coming soon. I give another 2, 3 years, but that's about it, really.
Yeah, I mean, this is curious because I did a video I think last week I did a video on the latest resignation from the DA in Natal. Um, and I got a bit of slack for that video because people were like, you guys are just kind of ratting on the DA. And the fundamental thesis of the video was actually nothing to do with the DA at all. The fundamental thesis of the video was this: what hope is there for the future of Natal when the very politicians who are there, who are meant to be servicing that province, desert that province? When the rats leave, you know that there's a problem. And I don't view any of the political parties as being the savior of humanity. They're all corrupt. The very nature of them being politicians is corrupt. So I'm not of the view that you could say, let's give it to any political party and it will be the savior of their province. But when the rats desert the ship's going down. And that's ultimately what you have to look at. And if you look at that province, so much has hit that province. I'm not sure that province can be saved, regardless of who comes in. And that was the fundamental thesis of the video. But it seemed to kind of like miss the mark with a few people, and a few people kind of didn't really seem to understand what it is that I was trying to say.
Yeah,
But I think that's something that you yourself say quite a bit.
but just sticking to that theme, and I heard this story from you where you have a mayor of some small town who's been in power for 5 years, can't do anything, right? The DA took over the town. For 5 years, they couldn't implement any service delivery because all the contractors haven't been paid. The municipality was bankrupt. There was no money. So the first 5 years was just about consolidating. And then the next 5 years, should they win that, is about building and
Again,
creating service delivery.
yeah, I mean,
That's one small
that's
town.
correct. I mean, if
Imagine the whole country. Imagine
correct,
the whole province. We got 30 years of pillaging. It's going to take 60 years to get back to normal.
but I'm not even sure that we could. I mean, again, bring it back to one of the morning shot originals. You did a morning shot original on the construction mafia. I mean, that mafia is so embedded that even if I had to come through to redoing infrastructure, even if you had a brand new government in place, with the pillaging that's gone on in SAPS, we did a video on SAPS. We said about a police station that had had its guns pillaged from it. Again, the central thesis of that video seemed to have been lost to people. Maybe it's our fault. But the central thesis of that video wasn't that guns had been stolen from a police station. Like, who cares? Guns get stolen from police stations all the time. It was essentially how many bullets that police station had. It was like 25 rounds for a 9mm. It was like, 69 rounds for R4. Like, that's 2 clips. That's 2 magazine clips for an R4 for an entire police station. There's nothing to loot. And that's the problem. So even if you got a new government in place, how would you get a sufficient armed force like a SAPS revitalization in order to take on the construction mafia? And you did a video on this, and the central argument was you can't. You just got to build them now into the situation and just kind of cope with it. So is it really going to matter who you get in place? Some of the problems now are just too endemic.
Yeah, and also we're in a scenario where a very weak and corrupt ANC might be better than a build back better liberal political party running this country. But that's for a separate video.
100%.
This one has gone on for quite a while.
100%.
But yeah, it might be better, in essence, to have the ANC weak, corrupt, and useless than sort of a globalist party come in and take over. Because that's, to me, far worse.
I would agree. I would agree.
There you go.
Anyway,
Morning
Ramon,
shots.
we probably
Morning
talked
shots
about this
supporting the
topic enough.
ANC. What next? Anyway, stay tuned for tomorrow's video. Thanks for watching, everyone. Cheers.
Take it easy. Cheers.